Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Career Advice Series webinar, Leading and Managing Diversity, Inclusion, and High Performance. I am Emily Roshak, Director of ABA Legal Career Central, a career center that offers both career development resources and a job board for law students, lawyers, and other legal professionals across all disciplines and career stages. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Samorn Selim. Samorn Selim is founder of Samorn Selim Coaching. She was formerly the Director of Employer Outreach and Associate Director for Private Sector Counseling and Programs at Berkeley Law and an attorney at Manat, Phelps & Phillips. She is a board member of ABA Legal Career Central. Samorn, thanks so much for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Samorn Selim, and I'm excited to be here to moderate this panel and also introduce our esteemed faculty. Robert White is Executive Director of the California Minority Council Program, and he's been there since August 2015. During his tenure, he's done a lot to expand the programs, explored more creative ways to bring diverse attorneys together, and has been recognized nationally for his achievements and the organization's achievements. Robert was also the first ever Director of Alumni Career Services at Berkeley Law School, which is actually where we met, and it's been a pleasure getting to know Robert since then. He began his career as a corporate associate at Jackson Tufts Cole & Black, and later served as Vice President and Senior Counsel in the Technology Group of Wells Fargo Bank. He received his law degree from Stanford Law School and has been in leadership positions for numerous organizations, including the ABA, NALP, and the Public Interest Law Group. Macey Russell is a senior partner at Choate, Hall and Stewart's Complex Trial and Appellate Group, and represents major corporations and financial institutions in litigation matters in state and federal courts. Macey has done so much for the community and has received numerous awards, including the Diversity Hero Award from the Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly. He's also been named for excellence for his legal writing and co-authored an article called Developing Great Minority Lawyers for the Next Generation. And this award was the Burton Award for Excellence. He's chaired the Judicial Nominating Commission in Commonwealth of Massachusetts and served as a frequent advisor to Harvard Law School's Trial Advocacy Program. He graduated from Trinity College and Suffolk University Law School. He's also active in the community and has been the past president of the Boys and Girls Club. So we'll move right along into the presentation. Obviously, I couldn't do Robert and Macey justice in terms of their background. So as we're moving forward in the program, we'll be covering defining diversity, inclusion, and belonging, where Robert and Macey will also talk about their inspiration for championing this cause, diversity as a tool for high performance, strategies for systemic changes, strategies for individuals to advocate for change, and we'll also take questions from the audience. If you do have questions as we're moving along in the program, feel free to type them to us and we'll try to answer them accordingly as we're moving through the program. So Robert, I'll start with you. I wanted to get a sense of how you define diversity, inclusion, and belonging, because this is a really hot topic, especially what's going on in the world. And also why you chose to champion this particular cause, because there are so many issues that you can be involved with. Obviously, you've been a leader in this area and you've made huge strides throughout your career, and especially since your tenure with CMCP.
Right. Well, thank you, and very happy to be here and on this panel and talking to this audience. You know, for me, as I think about, kind of this very quickly, what does diversity, inclusion, and belonging mean to me? At a very personal level, it means kind of creating environments where I and people like me can just feel comfortable, not feel like there is a barrier to be broken through or effort needed to simply do the basic functions of life, having a good career, having good relationships with your colleagues. On the organizational level, I imagine a field where lawyers can just be themselves, and where the actual demographics of law firms, legal departments actually reflect those of society at large. On a personal level, kind of about my background in how I moved into this role. Very candidly, I did not grow up planning on being a diversity leader or a champion or anything like that, if in fact that's what happened. I had a fairly, typical for a lot of Black people background. Grew up, relatively poor, first my family to go to college. I think as I went to law school, honestly, my focus was really on, just being able to take care of myself and my family. And I think it's a combination of life and work experiences that, shaped me more towards focusing on diversity. Just one story I'd share quickly that was kind of my introduction to some of the barriers that in the legal sector. In one of my first law firm interview as a law student, I think I was a 1L, one suit, cotton blend shirt, walk into the law firm in San Francisco and go up to the reception desk to announce myself. And the receptionist just hands me a clipboard and says, well, you need to fill this out. And I said, well, I have an interview set up and I've already submitted my resume, et cetera. She said, you just need to fill out the clipboard. So I quietly take it and go to a corner and start penciling in, employment history. And a second later, another woman comes rushing down the hall, hair streaming behind her, red in the face, snatches the clipboard from my face and ushers me into my first interview with a law firm partner. So clearly there was a mistake about what I was actually there for. And the message I take from that are two. One is that, as a diverse lawyer, barriers start emerging even before you get a foot in the door, literally. The second is that there wasn't a dialogue around what had happened. And I think that's what's still missing today is just good discussion around how these issues of bias show up, what we are actually doing to address them. And that's a lot of my kind of motivation and background. Just kind of moving on to, what I see in the legal field in general. We have a slide, I think, is showing the diversity of lawyers versus those in other professions. We are part of the least diverse profession in the United States. And that's something, I take personally, and I hope other lawyers take personally. And as we move on and we look at some of the demographics of law firms, and I think my colleague in this, Macey, will talk in more detail, we see there are some sharp discrepancies in the numbers of diverse lawyers in firms. And most strikingly, as we move to the next slide, you'll see the numbers for minority women they're really atrocious. I think it's something that we need to really take seriously. We need to really work hard at making our profession more inclusive. So then I think as we kind of move on, the area that I spend a lot of time on in this job is working with lawyers who are working in legal departments. There, the numbers are a little bit better, in particular with respect to women, where you have almost 50% population there, so kind of reflects more of what's in society. And numbers for minority lawyers are at least a little better than what's in the firm. But there's a lot of work to be done, both in what happens inside legal departments and, more prominently, how legal departments can work with law firms on helping them to diversify so that pipeline of diverse lawyers grows bigger. So I'll stop there and let you hear from Macey.
Yeah, we really appreciate your candor, Robert, your story about going to the firm and experiencing that and being mistaken for another position is not an uncommon story. I know when I was working at the firm, when I was in trial, everybody at the courtroom thought I was the secretary or the assistant. And and you're right, there is no conversation or dialogue around what happened. And so there's this huge elephant in the room. And it's a very uncomfortable experience, but there doesn't seem to be a safe space to have that conversation. So we're really delighted that you are leading and championing this cause and trying to create space and have a safe space where people can talk about these types of experiences and not just stay there, but also think about strategies on how they can improve things on an individual level as well as a systemic level. And I know we'll cover more of that later. So we've heard from Robert. Love to hear from Macey about your background and why you've chosen to champion diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and what it means to you.
Well, I think like Robert, I think there's a passion that develops when you're younger, not knowing why it happens, but you look back and it's like, wow, I became someone who's kind of a champion of diversity. and my story is very similar to his. When I was in law school, there was a professor, white guy, beard. You know, he was known as someone who was a pool player, loved jazz, the whole bit, and felt comfortable around people who looked like me. And I did fairly well in law school, and I was getting these interviews, and he said, I want to give you some advice before you go on your first interview. He says, you realize within the first 5 minutes of your interview, you have to make the white partners in the law firms feel comfortable with you, or you have no shot at getting a job. And I wasn't even thinking about diversity. I mean, I knew there weren't many, but he made it real clear that it was my responsibility to make them feel comfortable. And if you couldn't do that, it doesn't really matter how smart you are, you won't make it. And then I had a similar story to Robert when I went in for an interview at an old line firm in Boston, and I was asked point blank by a partner that wouldn't I be better off helping my people in Roxbury where the black folks live rather than working in a law firm. And I kind of gathered my composure and said, well, sir, the reason I'm interested in working in a law firm is I went to college with a number of kids who were going into law, and we have similar interests and we want to do similar things. He didn't know what to say in kind of response to that. He kind of grumbled a little bit, but he was kind of surprised that I'd want to, live in his world. So as someone who's been a partner for about 25 years here in Boston, I'm fortunate now I'm not the only black partner in my firm. We have a black woman partner. But for most of my career, almost all of it, I was the only black partner for a period of time, the only black associate. Do you want to just go to the slide there, please? Nope, keep going. Going the other way. I think slide 10. There we go. So if you want to know why I'm passionate, if you just look at the number of African American partners in this country, there are almost 50,000 partners. Only 913 of them are African American, and only 329 are African American women. You can go to the next slide. And you can see for associates, I mean, there are 45,000 associates, and there are less than 2,000 African Americans. Go to the next slide. And this kind of shows what's been happening in almost the last 10 years since 2009. That's why I stay passionate, because for me, in some ways, this is a civil rights issue. I kind of grew up during the civil rights movement, and I feel obligated to try to keep the door open for young African Americans who are coming up today and other minorities. But as you'll see, there's a number missing there. But for African Americans, their numbers have gone down by 144 lawyers since 2009. The Hispanic numbers have gone up by 159. But African Americans represent the only group that's going in the opposite direction of the rest of the legal profession and the partnerships. And not that these numbers are big numbers, but you can just see that African Americans are struggling at the associate level and the partner level. And then just one last slide, and I'll stop there. The next slide just kind of shows you what in cities where there's supposed to be lots of diversity, and you can't see on the bottom slide, but you're looking at Boston, for example. It has 51% of the people in Boston are minorities. There are 1,500 partners, only 15 are African American. And you look at New York City, they only have 98 out of over 6,000. So, and only 32 African American women out of 6,500 in New York City are partners. And this is both equity and non-equity. So I guess I'm passionate about it. I'll just continue to fight the good fight for as long as I can. And hopefully we'll talk about a little bit later, some of the things that, can be done to try to address these issues.
Thank you, Macey. Your story, much like Robert's, is really inspiring. And I think some themes that we're hearing here that resonates, and this is something I dealt with a lot when I was working at the various law schools, including Berkeley Law School, is that when you're going into the interview room, especially for large law firms or really established organizations, and you get questions like, why are you doing this as opposed to something else, or going back to your community, it automatically creates this divide. And the fact that you had to defend your position puts you in a really awkward, uncomfortable position from the get-go. Not to mention that the interviews themselves are such an intimidating experience. So I hope that as the audience is listening to this, whether maybe you were the person who had asked those types of questions yourselves in an interview, or you're the person experiencing it, that you take this into mind, that the questions that you ask in an interview and how you train interviewers at your organization can really have an impact on how candidates feel and whether or not they feel welcomed, and whether or not, even if you give them an offer, if they choose to come to your organization, because there's that automatic divide. So really appreciate you sharing that candidly. And I think it's impressive that you were able to respond without being apologetic or super defensive, which is naturally where I think most people go. So thank you for raising those issues, because I think it continues today, and it still remains to be an issue that needs to be addressed in the legal profession and at large. Really appreciate you sharing the background, the statistics, sort of where we're at, where we're making some progress in corporate counsel positions and where we're still falling really behind in a lot of law firms. And so what I do want to do is transition into talking about, well, what do we do with all this information, and how can we use diversity as a way to champion high performance and use this as a tool to affect change and to make things move in a more positive direction. So how can diversity, inclusion, and belonging be used as a tool for high performance in the workplace? And can you talk about specific ways that you advocated for these types of changes and your successes and challenges? And this time we'll start with you, Macey, because I think something you mentioned that was really interesting about the interview was that the partner there asked, like, why do you want to be in my world? And now you're in that world, and as you mentioned, you were for a very long time the first African American associate and the only African American associate and now partner, and you've been able to increase that number by one more. So just really, really curious to hear your perspective on this.
Well, it's interesting because as I think about it today, I've tried to figure out in terms of performance and doing what you can in the workplace to perform at a high level. You just want to be able to be a lawyer without your race or your gender or your ethnicity being an issue, but that it's going to be there. But I do think that, like, no one can have all the answers. There's not one person that can have all the life experiences that are needed to look at issues and to solve issues. So you have to feel confident in your ability to be able to contribute something that somebody else can't contribute. There are a lot of times where you just know from where you grew up and what you experienced that the person you're talking to who's never been there has never understood from that perspective. So I've always tried to do that. But the other thing I tried to do with being in a position where you're the only African American associate or only African American partner is to be an active listener, because the key to change is hearing what people are saying. And it's really difficult to have conversations about race and gender and ethnicity because people feel defensive. They feel as if they're being attacked. So what I try to do over the years is to really understand what it is that they're saying and what they're not saying. And so, it may be, they're trying to, mentor a young African American associate, and we had a situation where this partner was really frustrated with this memo that was written by this young associate, Ivy League law school, a whole bit. And he brought it to me, and at that time another black partner, and reread it. And we're like, you're absolutely right. This is not very good. And so we understood his frustration. He's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can be critical. can you guys be critical of this associate? And I was like, yes, we will be. But I tried to listen. I've tried to understand what it is that they're thinking. I'm trying to understand where they grew up, the lives that they've lived, the experiences that they've had that makes them conclude or feel a certain way about a person of color. And then being able to communicate that in a way that is non-threatening.
You know, Macey, that's
Kind of
actually
like
a great point that you're talking about. A question just came through from the audience, and it's a really great question. I think her name is Moriyama, Moraima. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. She's the director of HR and diversity compliance, and one of the issues she encounters in her company is that there are some people who are, you know, more of minorities in the group who have the perception that they're being treated differently because of the race, even though that might not be the situation. And it sounds like this might be a situation where, you know, depending on the associate's interaction with other partners, that person might feel, you know, I'm getting comments that are unfair, criticisms that are unfair. That can happen at times. And what you've said is that you all as a group agree that the memo really wasn't good, especially for somebody who graduated from such a great school, etc. How do you approach that? Because it is a very sensitive situation. And so what advice do you have for somebody who has to manage that relationship?
So here's what the way I think they should think about it, and we've tried to do it at our firm. So the ultimate elephant in the room is that you have bias on both sides of the equation. So we know from studies, whether it's the resume study or the writing sample study, that there's a potential for a white partner who's a baby boomer who grew up in the 60s when the world was, you know, pretty much black and white, might have trouble communicating with an African American associate who might be first generation from Haiti or Jamaica. There's just so much of a cultural difference there that it's hard to mend. So the associate's saying, hey, that partner, I know he's biased. You know, if my name was Sally, he would look at my memo differently. Then on the other side of the equation, you have the associates as saying, because I know or believe that they're biased, I don't trust them when they're telling me something, and I can't tell whether the information they're providing to me by way of criticism or constructive or otherwise is because of bias or it's legitimate. And therein lies the distrust on both ends. And what we found is that because of that, a minority associate is less likely to challenge a partner by going back and saying, look, I don't understand the assignment. I don't understand what you're asking me. So they don't ask the questions that they might need to ask. They go off and they do the assignment on their own. They may miss something. They present the memo, and then there's bias on the back end. Hey, this is not what I wanted. Why is this person at the firm? And on the front end, the associate's saying, I can't ask the question because if I do, they're going to say, why are you asking me a silly question? You should know better. So that's the dynamic that plays out almost every day in law firms on both sides of the equation. And the only way that I would suggest to get to that is to be able to create opportunities for there to build trust and have open conversations. And one way of doing it is to give real-time feedback. Don't wait 6 months before you give an associate some feedback on an assignment. And I would tell the partners, get out of a mentoring mode and getting into a teaching mode. Try to teach, but ultimately you have to spend some time to get to know the person that you want to critique so that they understand that you mean more to them than you're just an associate handling a project.
Thanks for sharing. That sounds like what you're saying, that there is a human side to it and part of this. And I really appreciate you saying there's actually bias on both sides, and that, you have to address those particular issues. This is obviously a really complex, nuanced question that we could probably spend the next 5 hours talking about. But in the interest of time and moving things along, I also wanted to pose a similar question to Robert. And for you, Robert, I know you both personally worked in-house and now you're also championing creating more diversity and inclusion with corporate counsel. So love to hear your perspective on how diversity has been used as a high performance tool in the workplace and how we can do that in a more effective way. And then also specific ways in which you've advocated for change and the successes and challenges that you faced.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, no, thank you. And I just want to echo, I think Macey's observations are, spot on around, the need for, better communication in the legal field. And I think one of the real challenges for us is that for most law firms and legal settings, there's kind of a culture of silence, that you just don't talk about certain things or you don't talk about it publicly. And that silence has the effect of perpetuating the same dynamic. But in terms of I think what we can do for, looking at, diversity and inclusion in the workplace and leveraging it as a tool. And there's lots of studies out there, and you see them in Forbes and all the business writings about the value of diverse teams, how they're much better at problem solving, how people actually work harder when they're in a more of a mixed group, that the opportunities for communication and collaboration are better there. I think the longer and the more we kind of push that out and kind of keep announcing that and kind of flagging, okay, this group is really homogenous. How are you going to be a good problem solver? Helps. I certainly hear lots of stories from the in-house counsel about being pitched by law firms and giving them some very frank feedback that, my team, my customers look like this, rainbow, and you're bringing a set of lawyers to represent me that are monolithic. I mean, they're all the same. They're not same gender, same race. How can you really work effectively with me and my team if you can't match us at that level? I think in terms of, as a manager, how you can manage diversity and inclusion and really kind of leverage it is to really be kind of thoughtful about how you can actually bring in more voices and being attentive. I think if you're at the law firm, I think waiting until, you've seen an associate starting to struggle and you've noticed their hours go down every month isn't as productive as kind of flagging it early on, having a conversation, figuring out what's really going on there. Is there maybe something that has nothing related to the firm that's going on? Is it something that they're not getting good work? They're not feeling comfortable, putting themselves out there? There's a lot of things that can be going on. And I think that by kind of proactively addressing it, we can create a lot of better opportunities. Some specific ways that, I've seen done or that, I've tried to work on it. So within California Minority Counsel Program, CMCP, we have a group of younger lawyers, kind of our emerging stars, that we really put a lot of effort into giving leadership opportunities and also helping them build community with each other. So these lawyers, some of them are at firms, some of them are in-house. They're at different stages of their careers. But I think by helping them have someone to talk to outside of the regular circles, I think it's really supporting them. And I think it also gives them some very valuable business connections that they start developing at an early stage in their career. Some of the other programs we've tried to do are like bringing together diverse lawyers who are working in-house so they can kind of do their own networking. So outside of the kind of networking that happens when law firms and in-house counsel meet, this is a chance for in-house counsel to do the kind of connection building that's going to help them in their own careers to move up. Because the fact is, it's a relationship business that the way you get hired and noticed often has as much or more to do with kind of who you know and how you presented yourself, as well as kind of building up your resume. Some of the things I'm really excited about us doing are trying to get creative about kind of how we look at diversity. So one of the programs, for example, that we have on our slate coming up in June is a program on doing pro bono work. Looking at it both in terms of how law firms and legal departments work together on that and can leverage each other, but also how it relates to diversity. Like it can be a way to actually engage your diverse lawyers who often want to give back, but don't have the tools or opportunity to do that, in a way to kind of make them feel more comfortable in their work setting because a company or law firm is signaling that they actually care about the same things that these lawyers care about. And finally, I would say that one of the things that we're also trying to do is to look at how diversity committees and diversity councils and employee resource groups can best work. So we're doing a deep dive on what are best practices, what are the tough issues that these groups face? Like, do you want to be super inclusive where you kind of get more feedback, more buy-in, but you also maybe are damaging the idea of having a safe space where diverse lawyers can go, not just to work together, but to also kind of bond. How do you get buy-in at your C-suite level there? So I think there are a lot of really exciting opportunities that are out there for things we can do to, push diversity forward. And just in closing, I think some of the challenges that are out there are that as we've kind of evolved as a legal sector, one of the real challenges is that diversity in some ways has become, it's kind of a business expense and a business development opportunity. And I think sometimes that kind of sincerity that probably was there earlier on isn't always there. I think when you start thinking at the organizational level about, what's my diversity budget and, what kind of business development opportunities can I get out of putting together this kind of diversity program versus how can I actually make things better, for diverse lawyers in the community.
Robert, that raises a really great point. I think you've talked about so many great things that your organization is doing, and I hope that you continue to do that and other organizations are championing that. We also got a really great question from the audience about what you're actually talking about right now is perhaps there isn't as much sincerity around championing diversity and inclusion. It's a tough question. How do you handle tokenism versus actual inclusion and belonging? And the fact that there is minority burnout where ex-lawyer feels a resentment because they're asked to be going to all these diversity dinners or diversity talks. And so this question was from Sharon from our audience. So if you could address that, that'd be really great.
Oh, sure. No, I think that's an excellent point. So there's an article, kind of a blog, I can't remember the author's name, but it's called 8 Ways People of Color Are Tokenized in the Nonprofit Sector. And even though it said this about the nonprofit sector, a lot of it really is very relevant to the private sector as well. Some of the points that the author makes are, these tricky ones, like even around kind of stepping in and trying to help diversity. But if you are the only, whatever Asian or Black attorney or partner at your firm, and someone who's also Asian is struggling, and you're kind of asked, hey, can you have this conversation with them? Are you helping because you're giving them an ability to talk, more directly to them, or are you actually being presented as almost a shield for the organization because they don't want to have to deal with this messy business of having a tough conversation, right? I think it calls it a constant awareness of what's going on, and then candid discussion within the company or firm about what you can do. I think in terms of things that you can do to kind of avoid that, a lot of it is around, as we talked about, try to create a trusting environment where you can have tough and candid conversations that go both ways. But will, I think, end up in a much better result.
Yeah, these are tough topics. Again, we could probably talk about this for days. So, great questions from the audience. Please keep them coming. We'll definitely try to incorporate them throughout the presentation. I do want to move on now from using diversity as a high performance tool to specific strategies for advocating for systemic changes. And I think changes has to come, from the top, from leadership, and then also from the individuals. So we'll talk about the systemic changes now, and then we'll talk about changes for individuals a little bit later in the program. So what do you both see as some of the systemic challenges, and what roles do you think advocates, managers, HR, and others who have positions of power and influence can play in addressing these challenges to actually affect change? So we'll go ahead and just start with you, Robert.
Sure. I just think that, the way that lawyers are even developed from starting who goes to law school and which law schools, how are you recruited to firms, how are you developed as an attorney, how do you make partner, how do you get business? Each stage has opportunities for kind of getting derailed and, these kind of systemic challenges. There are some things that are built into the business model for how the law practice is conducted. It's a relationship business, which means that you have to get over the kind of personal biases and issues there in order to succeed. I think there's a socioeconomic aspect of it, given the price of law schools and what's needed to develop and position yourself to even become a lawyer. I think what we can do as advocates and managers are to, one, try to identify those. I think one of the biggest things we can do is to really push for breaking this kind of rigid thinking about how we do certain things. Like, if your firm only recruits from certain schools, like really kind of looking at it, do we really need to only recruit at those schools? Are there other places that we can go? Are there places we can recruit that aren't even necessarily law schools, right? By using social media and other venues. I think in terms of like looking at how lawyers leave the practice, having an actual exit interview, or doing research and trying to figure out, like, well, why do they not feel they can succeed in this environment? And then kind of proactively figure, okay, how can we address that? Is it around how they work? Do they need more ability to work remotely? Do they need, more support? Do they need to have access to other kind of communities where they can feel more supported? I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to get involved there. I just say quickly, I think one of the big things to think about is it's really being empowered. So a quick story, I got had a meeting by these young associates at a law firm who were very kind of fired up and passionate about diversity, but felt their firm is really dragging its heels on it, doesn't really pay attention to them. And they wanted to press home to the firm that they should be doing this. So I made an exception to what I would normally do and said, it's fine, we'll put on a program at your firm as part of one of your business meetings so that we make sure everyone at the firm is witness to this. And we'll have your clients and prospective clients come in and talk to you from a business perspective about why diversity is important to them and how it's going to kind of relate to the amount of business that firm's going to get. I would not normally do that, but I felt like, okay, here's a case where I want to support these attorneys. And in turn, they've done some things that are really great. So they've insisted that for their regular meetings of the firm, they use minority vendors, bring in not just the regular old, specialties or whatever the equivalent is, sandwiches, but how about going to the Jamaican place down the street or the taqueria? Bring in more diverse food. It seemed very simple, but I think it started breaking that mindset of we have to do things the same way, right? And just bring kind of some intentionality to promoting diversity.
Wow, great. Great to hear that you're, also being really committed to supporting these young associates. That's a common story I hear from working with a lot of diverse attorneys, is that they really want to support the cause, but it's been really difficult, and they don't seem to see, leadership will say we support this, but there hasn't been a lot of efforts in terms of investing money or time or resources to making this happen. So that's a way that you can make a change. And I think you're right that supporting minority business owners is also another way to continue to expand, bringing about different ways of addressing diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Same question for you, Macey. What are some of the systemic challenges you see, and what role can advocates and managers play? You've done a lot of work in the law firm setting. You're actually a partner who has a voice in the firm. And so how have you been able to look at these systemic challenges from an organizational level at your own organization, but also at large, because you're very involved with organizations at the national level as well?
Well, I think you have to look at it, and I mean, by pulling the lens back at the systemic challenges and kind of understand where they come from. As I mentioned earlier, most of the baby boomers who run major law firms are white men. A small percentage of them are women. And so their outlook is, we've been really successful as lawyers without diversity, and many of them have been successful without using women. Their clients don't ask for them. So in their own mind, bringing a diverse person onto their team is not going to make them a better lawyer. It's not going to make them wealthier. That's their mindset, and they've been running things like this for a long period of time. But David Wilkins in 1995, it just shows my age, wrote an article. But in the article, he had a quote that has not, it stayed with me since that time. And it's, great lawyers are made, not born. And I think that law firms overestimate that they think that the lawyers that walk into their office were born great, or they became great because of, they're going to certain private schools, certain law schools. And that's just not the case. I think what he says is that What's most important is the ability of the lawyer to provide advice to a client with confidence that the person is making a decision that's informed, and that a lot of that development comes from mentoring. It comes from opportunities for the partner to say to an associate, here's why I do it this way. Let me give you a few examples of what's happened. That kind of communication seldom takes place with minority associates. And so I also look at it systemically and I say, okay, what are we really dealing with within a law firm environment? And I have what's called the 90-10 rule. 90% of the partners don't really care, because to become involved in diversity inclusion efforts, gender, race, whatever, it disrupts their ability to get work done, to build clients, and to make money. But you have 10%, my guess is, in every firm that really do care. But the problem is that the partnership doesn't empower those 10% to do what they need to do to help minority and women associates develop. And what that would mean is that, you know, these 10% are the ones that are supposed to go to the other 90% and say, why aren't you using them? Why aren't you giving them the feedback you give to others? They need to be empowered to do that. And I would also say that within the 90%, I'd say there's probably 30% that you couldn't convince, no matter how long you spent with them, that they should do things differently. But there's probably 40, 50% in the middle, like, you know, if you can figure out for me how I could do a better job, I'm willing to do it, but I'm just not going to spend a lot of time trying to do it. So those are the systemic challenges that lawyers are busy. They try to solve problems. They're in it to make money. And with diversity, they're asked, oh, by the way, you need to be able to, you know, connect with an African-American woman who's gay or some other, you know, descriptive person, and that just disrupts their daily routine. So the strength, I think, the prospects for change, I think, is in the 10%. And I think we can talk later about what some of those strategies would be for those that are in the 10% within their organization, but they can make a difference.
Yeah. And then can I just jump in quickly there? I really am excited that one of the things that Macey pointed out is, like, you know, you have these partners who really are diversity champions, but who don't necessarily have the ability to influence other partners at the firm. But I think that points to one of the challenges of the legal field, which is this whole idea of the origination credit and how finances within the firm are handled, right? That I think one of the more exciting things I've seen happening is sometimes clients actually getting involved in saying, hey, if I'm giving work to this woman or a diverse lawyer, I want them to get credit for that, because that not only kind of is equitable, but it gives them more clout, like to encourage other partners at the firm to change how they staff matters. So it's kind of an obstacle. I think it's also something that I think there at least some effort to try to address, and I think it's kind of spot on and kind of observing kind of where some of the impediments to diversity are within a firm. People who aren't necessarily bad people, but who just don't have the motivation to do it without someone kind of prompting them with the ability to actually change behaviors.
Yeah, I really appreciate the candor that you both have. You know, I think diversity, inclusion, and belonging is a very hot topic, especially with what's going on nationally and worldwide. And there are also questions about, like, okay, but what can we really do? And the time that goes into it, as well as the business needs around it, and depending on the organizations that you're working for, billing hours, origination credit, those types of things really do matter and make a difference. And so as I'm listening to both of you talk about it, it seems like if we are going to affect change, there's one portion of it, which is having sincere advocates who are doing it just for the cause and for that purpose, and because you truly believe in it, like the two of you are. But then there's also another group where they're having these other challenging responsibilities, and how do we make it work, or what are some other incentives that we can align to further that along and help them come along. So these are definitely really challenging questions, and hope that we'll have more time with the ABA down the road to further discuss these systemic changes. And in some ways, we probably need a whole program or several days of programming for that topic alone. You know, I also see that you both have done things as an individual, and you both alluded to this as well. There have definitely been people who've asked, well, you know, if I'm just starting out, if I'm just a law student, or if I'm just a first-year attorney at a nonprofit or the government or at a firm, how do I actually make changes as an individual? So this brings us right along to our next questions, which is, what advice would you give to those who want to be involved but aren't sure how to get started? And how can people effectively advocate for others? Because I've been asked, you know, what if I see something going on and it's really uncomfortable? Should I say something? Should I not say something? And how do I do it in a way that is actually helpful and not offensive to others? And what can we do to inspire more people to get involved? Because that's what it's going to take, right? It's more participation, even if even if Macey is right about the 90-10% rule. Like, how do we increase that 10%?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start with you, Robert.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think in terms of like, how do you get involved? How do you have an impact? I mean, a lot of it comes down to having the commitment, and sometimes also being willing to be, you know, daring. You do have to kind of put yourself out there at some level, kind of personally, to be able to be vocal about, hey, I actually care about this. I think often that you'll find that when you put yourself out there, people can reciprocate and let themselves be a little bit more vulnerable and say, hey, I care about this too, but I didn't want to say anything because, you know, there's this whole kind of mythology that, you know, we go to work and we put on these suits and we become kind of armored and don't have a personal passion for a lot of these things. I think I would look for opportunities to do something that's going to have an impact and that's doable for you, right? Not all of us are meant to be people who are going to, you know, lead marches and, you know, charge into offices and, you know, demand change. Some of us are more relationship based, and I think you can look for ways to leverage that. Maybe that's kind of being a behind the scenes person that just tries to bring in a different perspective to a committee meeting. Maybe it means being a person who's more of a mentor or sponsor, you know, versus a vocal advocate. I think one of the kind of underlying notions for all of this, though, is making sure that you don't see yourself as someone who does not have power and the ability to influence behavior at the higher levels. Often, I think people in power become very insulated from what's really happening for the rank and file lawyers who are out kind of doing the work and, you know, dealing with these issues. And being a person who kind of like lets them know what you care about is important. You know, being mindful of the fact that, you know, it costs an organization a lot to replace an attorney. And if you can kind of phrase what it is you're interested in a way that aligns with the organization's interests, like, hey, we're concerned about our minority lawyer retention and, you know, and on women staying, you know, and making partner, you can get better traction there. And you kind of maybe can find a way that makes sense for you to actually contribute.
Mm-hmm. I had a follow-up question to that, Robert. And the follow-up question is, you know, some of these lawyers who are doing this work, it takes away time from their billable hours and them, you know, contributing to the firm in that way. And often, you know, at the end of the day, when performance reviews come, you're not getting credit for attending diversity luncheons or getting an award for being a diversity champion. You're getting credit for the hours that you put in and the amount that you're billing clients. And so what advice do you have for young attorneys who are in those shoes where they might be really busy with their workload at the public defender's office or at the firm, and they want to do this work, but there's this balance?
Yeah, that's a really tough one, and I'm sure Macey will have some views on this as well. And honestly, I think, you know, what's going to give you the most ability to change what happens at a firm? Is it being, you know, the diversity champion? Is it being the rainmaker? Right? When you kind of take care of your own career, you're able to kind of do more and to exercise more influence, right? So I think it is important to kind of balance that. I think sometimes it does mean kind of pulling back. But I think even with that, I would look at it as, okay, maybe I don't have the time. I'm not for partner. I need to put hours into that. let me look at this as an opportunity to bring other people into the fold and to develop them as a diversity champions, and take some of the load off of, my desk. I think that there is still an importance of thinking about sustainability, and also on the emotional level, right? Like if you're not doing the diversity work, if you're not doing the community service work, how is that sustaining you as a person, right? And I do think that as much as it takes time, I think often the best conversations, the most satisfying parts of the day can be the things when you're doing something for other people, where there's no money involved, but you're actually fulfilling your own kind of values of wanting to give back. And I think it's good to kind of give yourself credit for that, even if your firm isn't necessarily kind of giving you points for that work. It may be something that you need to do for your own psychological, kind of spiritual survival as well.
I love how you phrase that, sometimes the benefit isn't just financial or business. It's really, this is a purpose, a passion, and a mission, and it feeds your soul in ways that doing billable work or other kinds of work might not. Macey, same question to you. What advice would you give to those who want to be involved? I know you frequently speak at a lot of different bar associations, et cetera, about this particular topic, and would love to hear some specific strategies that you have for people who want to get started and want to, affect positive change in this area.
So I have kind of two points. One, I'll follow up first on what Robert had to say. I think we have to deal with the reality until there is like real change in law firms that 95 to 98% of minority associates are going to leave the organization that they're currently with within 5 to 8 years, maybe earlier. And unless you are known in your community, unless people know who you are, it makes it more difficult for you to move when that inevitable move comes to fruition. So I always tell folks, look, you need to get out there and meet people so they know who you are. They know where you work, so that when opportunities come up, they will keep you in mind. And for most firms, it's not whether you're going to leave, it's just when. So young minority lawyers need to start thinking about that early on. And then the other thing I think it does, it provides some stability, because at least when you work for outside organizations as nonprofits, they really appreciate what you're contributing to their organizations. And I always tell people, look, I get my battery recharged when I'm doing that. My battery gets drained in the office and recharged outside in the community. And for many, that's where they find their mentors. That's where they find their supporters. So I'm a big believer on that. I think it also allows you to connect with people who look like you and appreciate what you've done to get to where you are. Because once you're in the law firm, you're just one of many, and it's not appreciated, I think, the same way. In terms of people who can become game changers, it should be clear to people by now that minority associates cannot make it in law firms by themselves. They need the help of senior associates. They need the help of partners. So the question I give to people is that, would you be willing to help that one person in your organization? You recruited them there, you brought them there, you just can't hand them off and say, make it on your own. So if you ask if one person can make a difference, like from a grassroots point of view, absolutely. That person who's senior in the firm, maybe the counsel, junior partner, senior partner, make a commitment to get to know one of the diverse lawyers in your firm. Really get to know them. Know their families, maybe have dinner together, get to know them outside of the workplace, and make it your mission to make that person the best possible lawyer they can be. I think the only thing that minorities want when they step into these organizations is to be given the same opportunities for success as everyone else. And that requires, challenging them, confronting them, pushing them to be really good. And if you do that as an individual in the firm, when that person leaves, they'll feel good about themselves, or something may happen. That person may go from someone who is, putting in a 75% effort to someone who's putting in 100%, 110% effort because someone actually cares. So I think each person in an organization, they can look to the organization and say the firm's not doing anything, but the ultimate question is, what are you doing? Have you done anything yourself? And if you can't point to something that you've done, then, you need to question that.
Well, thank you for the candor. I know we're running into the hour, and I want to thank the audience for their great questions. If there are additional questions, we won't have time to answer them on this particular call because we're at the end of the hour, but certainly we're happy to reach out to you afterwards. So feel free to send your questions via email to us. And just to summarize, I want to say thank you again, Robert and Macey, for such a frank discussion around this. Some themes that I'm hearing is, one, how can we create a safe space to have this conversation that is going to be impactful and in a way that encourage us to talk about this instead of having the silence of culture and perpetuating the issues and the lack of diversity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace and at large. Two is, what can you do at an organizational level? If you're somebody who's in leadership, you can actually advocate for resources to be given to people. You can also do something more on an individual level of mentoring people. And then three is what I found really inspiring about both of your stories is that you both didn't come in really wanting to do diversity, inclusion, and belonging work at all. But it was just part of your life story. And then as you were able to build your careers, you then found opportunities to contribute. And I hope that inspires individuals who maybe, hadn't been as involved to know that at any point in your life and your career, if you want to get involved, you can take that first step. And there are small things that you can do. You can join organizations like Robert's organization, or, reach out to a mentor or reach out to somebody you can mentor yourself. So those are really great. I'll turn it over to Emily now, who will help conclude.
Thanks, Samorn. Thanks, Robert and Macey, too, for sharing all your excellent insight on strategies for leveraging diversity, inclusion, and affecting positive change in this area. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. Attendees, please be sure to check out our website at ambar.org/careers for upcoming free career-related articles and webinars. There are recordings on the website, and on your screen is our upcoming Career Advice Series webinar, which is being co-sponsored with the ABA Young Lawyers Division. We're doing a program on emotional intelligence, and immediately afterwards there will be a live Facebook event where you can submit your questions directly to the speaker on Facebook. So be sure to check that out on May 11th. And you can also follow us on social media, and you can check out our job board, and you can also meet our ABA Legal Career Central board on our About page. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,